Honored guests, I am pleased to introduce our next panel, Unraveling the Sahel, Conflict, Crisis, and Complexity. This discussion will be moderated by Mr. Idris Munir Lalali, Acting Director of the African Center for the Study and Research on Terrorism and Deputy Director of the African Union Counterterrorism Center. He will be joined by Dr. Jason Warner, Senior Associate in the Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Leonardo Santos Simão, Undersecretary General and Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations for West Africa and the Sahel. Ambassador Major General Retired Francis Adu-Amanfoh, Acting Executive Secretary of the Accra Initiative and former Special Advisor of the President of the Republic of Ghana for the Accra Initiative, and His Excellency Ahmad Abubakar, former Director General of the National Intelligence Agency of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Well, good morning, colleagues. Since the clock is ticking, I think we'll dive straight into the session. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be moderating such an important high panel on the Sahel, a subject or a region of great concern that finds itself at a crossroad of many challenges, such as enduring governance, cyclical political instability, unconstitutional changes of government, expanding transnational threats, terrorism on one end, violent extremism on the other, and then transnational organized crime. And then you add to that the consequences of humanitarian crisis, in addition to the challenges of environmental stresses. The Sahel, unfortunately, has become, and I would say, one of the most complex and volatile regions globally. And whether we look at it from a CT point of view, whether we look at it from the other challenges that are impacting the region and beyond. And even the definition of the Sahel countries, it is expanding, I would say, with the challenges that the region is facing. And we are, adding to the number of countries as part of the Sahel as those threats are challenging the stability of the region. Today's session, obviously, is not merely to analyze the depth of the crisis, but rather to see how we can, evolve collectively and envision forward-looking solutions, resilient and, I would say, sustainable peace in the region. By way of introduction, for those that don't know me, I think you heard my title. I'm the Acting Director of the African Union Counterterrorism Center, formerly known as the African Center for Study and Research on Terrorism. I speak from the lens of my personal, I would say, professional connection to the region, a region which I've been working with and engaging in for over 20 years, I would say as early as 2004, a region which allowed me also to interact and engage with this brilliant panel of experts over my career who have not only the leadership and experience, but continue to profoundly impact and I would say influence and shape the responses in the Sahel challenges. So without further ado, let me again introduce the panelists. We have with us Ambassador Leonardo Santos Simão, Under-Secretary General of the UN and the Special Representative for West Africa. And he brings with him over 30 years of experience in public administration and international diplomacy. We have Major and Retired General Francis Adu-Amanfoh. You're most welcome, sir, and you're heading one of the most, I would say, critical and important regional mechanisms in the region. And a lot is, being said and invested in that region, but also expectations are high in relation to the Accra Initiative. We also have our dear brother, Ahmed Rufa Abubakar, who was the former the Director General of the Nigeria Intelligence Agency. He's been, or had the opportunity of leading one of the most important agencies in Nigeria during a volatile period in the Sahel and Lake Chad basins. Last but not least, Dr. Jason Warner. He's a senior African associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's published heavily and extensively on African issues, in particular Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. and has authored, I think, a landmark and a reference book on the Islamic State in Africa. I should also indicate that I've been one of his subjects. He interviewed me at his time at the West Point CTC Center, and I was part of his series of the Foxhall, I would say, interviews. And, you know, Jason, it's my time to pay you back because I haven't recovered from that interrogation. Without further ado, let's just dwell straight into the subject, Jason. Let me start with you. From an external perspective, how do international countries or partners, especially from the US side, and I would say its allies in NATO, perceive the threat or grasp the understanding of the threat in the Sahel, and how do they identify or what potential there is in terms of a role they can play in addressing or assisting the countries in addressing these threats?
Great. Yep. Idris, thank you. Pleasure to be here, and I'll keep my remarks brief to get to the other, the more distinguished panelists, I should say. But I think certainly from the U.S. and NATO perspective, it's been a while coming, but there is now the recognition that the Sahel is indeed the global epicenter for global jihadist terrorism, particularly with the preceding nearly 2 decades, with a focus on Iraq and Syria and South Asia as generators of jihadist violence. The shift has now come, and it's taken a while, but there is now the recognition that the Sahel particularly is really the locus of this violence. And obviously, you know, to sort of set the scene, we're really talking about Al-Qaeda and Islamic State associated groups, particularly JNIM on the Al-Qaeda side, and the Islamic State in Greater Sahara on the Islamic State side. And you know, any research that you look at that is coming out from serious think tanks shows that the Sahel is responsible for more than half of global deaths associated with global jihadist terrorists in 2024 at least. And just again, to set the scene, Burkina Faso was the #1 generator of deaths from jihadist violence, followed by Mali at #4, Niger at #5, and Nigeria at #6. So this is really a Sahelian story. I think from the global perspective, we are, or at least the United States and NATO side, and I speak in an unofficial capacity, it's very worrisome. It's very worrisome, and it's been very worrisome. I think that we are concerned not only for the stability of states and ally states in the Sahelian region, but also the civil societies who live there. And we are increasingly concerned with the likelihood of perhaps the fall of capitals. And I think, unfortunately, we hear in the analytic community globally an increasing concern about what it would mean if a Sahelian capital fell, and the potential emergence of a global, or of a regional, I should say, proto-jihadi state, akin to what we saw in Iraq and Syria in 2014 to 2017. Hopefully this doesn't come to pass. I mean, this is the hope. In addition to sort of the general stability of the region, I think the United States and our partners are concerned about the remaking of the West African international order, politically, in terms of international organizations. The withdrawal of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger from ECOWAS, and the creation of the Alliance of Sahelian States is really throwing into disarray a little bit historical patterns of alliances. And then, of course, the decision by Sahelian states to engage with private military companies and some of the abuses that we see occurring there are another set of concerns. But I'll end my remarks by simply saying that despite all of these challenges, the Sahel still does not yet rise to the level of a major national security threat to most, at least to the United States, I would say, primarily because the will and capacity to attack the U.S. homeland doesn't seem to exist from those groups. And I'll end my comments there.
Well, thank you. It's kind of scary because we're actually looking at the same numbers again and being very, I would say, worried about this progression and this increased, I would say, aggression by these terrorists and the rapidity by which they are progressing. And actually, we're comparing notes with the Sanctions Committee, and I think we came to the conclusion that we are seeing indications that we might see, I would say, a relocation of HQs, headquarters of both the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda towards Africa, and this is quite scary. This pushes me now to to ask the question to the General in relation to the responsiveness of regional mechanisms and the adequacy of the regional mechanism. So, General, having led the coordination through the Accra initiative, how can regional frameworks evolve to confront the cross-border nature of the threats or the multitude of threats you're facing, from the threat of terrorism to transnational organized crime, which are the essence même or raison d'être of the Accra initiative. And how can we ensure that the Accra initiative doesn't end up like G5 Sahel?
First of all, this being my first time participating in this forum, let me say a big thank you to the organizers and also to convey my gratitude to the government and good people of Qatar for the hospitality given me since my arrival into the country. The subject under discussion is unraveling the Sahel, conflicts, its complexities, and the crisis. And my first observation is that the Sahel region has been inundated and overwhelmed, by large numbers of non-state actors, in fact, violent non-state actors. The Sahel region has a lot of terrorism groups emanating from a jihadist transnational insurgency. And this insurgency is creating lots of extremists, violent extremists, lots of terrorism groups, creating a lot of difficulties for local communities, and so on and so forth. And so, in order to confront these threats is why we have a proliferation of regional frameworks. I would say that we have had the G5 Sahel, we have had the multinational joint task force for the Great Lakes, for the Lake Chad Basin. ECOWAS itself is developing its standby force, which is yet to take off. And most recently, we have the regional framework known as Accra Initiative, where I am coming from. What is Accra Initiative? Accra Initiative is basically a counter-terrorism collective security mechanism established in 2017 by 7 member states in the ECOWAS sub-region. Namely, we have 4 coastal states, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Benin, and then we have 3 Sahelian states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These 7 countries decided to put their security assets and intelligence assets together to confront the threat. I would say that it has not been so well because the threat is not as easy as we see it. But for regional frameworks to be able to confront and defeat the threat, certain things must happen. First of all, I think that there must be the political will of the leaders of the framework, to ensure success and to ensure sustainability. There must be further, involvement by other partners and stakeholders to ensure success. There must be the adherence of the principle of sovereign equality. There must be mutual respect among the member states. There must be mutual confidence and mutual trust among the members of the framework. All these is put together is what will achieve success. And that is what will be able to confront the threat. If you ask me about Accra Initiative and why the G5 Sahel did not work and we think that Accra Initiative will work, I would say that the G5 Sahel failed, almost failed, because of 3 reasons. First, there were disparities in the standard of training and equipment of the various forces. there was inadequate supplies, inadequate logistics, and then above all, there was foreign control of leadership and financing. And these were the reasons why G5 Sahel did not succeed. Accra Initiative has vowed not to venture into those areas, and we want to sustain the initiative by veering away from these weaknesses that we witness with G5 Sahel.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that there were lessons learned, even from, I would say, failed initiatives. At least, what you're trying to put into practice and ensuring that the Accra initiative is indeed a success. Having ended on that note of failure and how, maybe partnership had led to the failure of G5 Sahel, let me turn now to His Excellency Simão to explore the multinational and international domain, the partnerships. From your vantage point, from a leading multinational coordination, how can international partners better support African-led initiatives or responses without really undermining regional ownership in that respect, or even influence the approach?
Thank you very much, Idris. Like the General, is the first time I participate in this important forum, and therefore I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the organizers of this important gathering, which is discussing one of the main challenges of our times, which is international peace and stability. As the General said, and the others colleagues said in the panel, the Sahel is the most affected area in Africa by terrorism. And this threat is increasing. These multiple groups are mushrooming, are becoming more and more aggressive, more and more sophisticated in the way they operate. And the threat is not only confined to the countries of Sahel. It was mentioned Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. But also we see other countries like under threat, like Chad, but also Mauritania, but also the transit of terrorism toward the coastal state. That means that also Europe, in a sense, is in threat, because when terrorism in the Sahel will link with the coastal states, it will be linked with the maritime crime. And therefore, the traffic of drugs, weapons, human beings, and many others will increase. And this will be also a threat to Europe, in addition to Central Africa and Southern Africa, as we see. So this is a more global threat. And I think we are still in time to contain it on that. And therefore, concentrated efforts should be put on making viable regional arrangements. One of these arrangements is precisely the Accra Initiative. Accra Initiative, in addition to the commitment of its membership, 7 countries, it needs also to prove that it's worth to the member states. So they have to feel the value of being members of this initiative. And the same goes to the ECOWAS standby force. Over and over again, a decision has been taken that this force should be put in action, but the lack of resources is impeding that to happen. So I think that international efforts should be put into empowering the regions also to take a front seat in fighting terrorism. They have a strong motivation, they know the terrain, and therefore they can address more effectively the threat of terrorism, and drawing lessons also from the lessons of the past. So all in all, putting in place, helping this mechanism, sub-regional mechanisms to be operational is the key for the success.
It is quite challenging, especially in a region where you have over 21 strategies, a multitude of agencies, a multitude of frameworks, a multitude of institutions. It's quite difficult to coordinate all this action. And we were hoping, through the Isufu report, Sahel 2.2, that some order could be put in the House in order to have I would say, a roadmap for the Sahel or an action plan where countries now can, that countries can follow in terms of implementing the right mechanisms, the right structures, but ensuring coordination between all these initiatives and also developing the capacity to react beyond the initiatives themselves. The issue of intelligence, for instance, is one aspect. We have MNTGF, the REFLU. We have the Accra initiative, which has an intelligence, I would say, mandate. We have the UFL in the Sahel. We have G5 Sahel, and then we have the ECOWAS early warning system, and how to ensure that these are talking to each other. I would, appreciate, brother and Excellency Boubacar, your insight from an intelligence point of view. With your intelligence background, how do you assess the ability of regional and national intelligence structures to anticipate and disrupt terrorist mobility, financing, an early warning mechanism? How are they able to anticipate the actions of terrorists and, avoid that terrorists exploit our weaknesses in relation to cooperation?
Thank you very much, Idris. I join my colleague also to thank the Sufan Group and the government of Qatar for this very important endeavor that has been going on for years. Idris, as you know, what's going on in the Sahel, in the larger Sahel, has been anticipated more than 20 years ago, actually, when CSIS, the Committee of Intelligence and Security Services, was created. Those symptoms were identified. Along the line, state national structures, and you mean by that national intelligence services and the agencies, have recalibrated over the years. Many of them in Africa that I know very well, and especially in the Sahel and in West Africa, they have units dedicated to counterterrorism that has not been there before. They have units that deal with terrorism financing and the mobility of funding and so on and so forth. They're doing well in terms of training, they're doing well in terms of collection of intelligence, they're doing well in terms of spread, linking up to communities, to society, and so on. But they have also been doing well in terms of understanding the nature of the threats, their adaptability, how they tap into everything that is providing a condition conducive to the terrorism to flourish, recruitment, and so on and so forth, vulnerability of the communities. And they tap into also the global communication system and the financial system to do all these things. But why is it that we have terrorism still continuing despite all this? Then we have the regional organizations that you talked about, some of them continental and some of them sub-regional, like the CISA that I mentioned, like also the RIFU, the Regional Intelligence Fusion Unit that was created to help the MNJTF, that is dealing specifically with actually Boko Haram in the Lecture region. So they have done very well in terms of galvanizing and mopping up and providing intelligence with the support of some partners I must mention here. And as you know, RIFU is made up of 3 intelligence and security services of Chad, 4 actually, Chad, Niger, Nigeria, and Cameroon, but with the support of partners, UK, US, and France. Now, we also have the ECOWAS early warning system, and then we also have the AU early warning system that has been there. But yet, despite the fact that, as I've mentioned, national intelligence services have done well in terms of building capacity, in terms of getting to the ground, collection of intelligence, and so on. And then now we have regional and sub-regional and continental organizations, but yet the threat persists. Now, there is, I think, some problem in terms of intelligence sharing. It is a little bit reactive, a little bit inconsistent, and siloed in some cases. So we need really to be more proactive, to be more consistent, and less siloed in terms of sharing of intelligence and so on and so forth. So, and then, of course, all these need to come under a very strong regional solidarity. And that regional solidarity has to have the political support of our leaders. So it means you have to have strong political support. You have to have a system that is technology enabled. You have to have exchanges. Over the years, of course, bilateral relationship in terms of liaison partnership has exponentially expanded. We are in contact with so many of us in terms of relationship and so on. But yet, there is some kind of inconsistency in that. But meanwhile, the bad guys are really adapting to the situation. Free movements over porous borders. So we need technology to leverage in terms of collection and sharing of intelligence, in terms of biometrics, in terms of tracking movement of funding and so on, and movement, physical movement of terrorists. So in short, we need a very strong regional intelligence ecosystem to be able really to leverage on technology and a very strong political will of our leaders to be able to deal with this threat. Thank you.
Indeed, this speaks to the heart of the problem, the intelligence, the information, the ability to identify, but also speaks to another challenge, which is the ability to act and react. So as much as we are investing in early warning, I don't think we're investing enough in early response mechanisms. And this is where I think the next challenge that we will need to deal with from at least an institutional point of view, the AU. I myself developed the counterterrorism early warning system, but yet, you can send information, reports like you said, were shared 20 years ago. 2004, I remember, I stood up, briefing the focal points, first meeting of focal points, drawing a big picture on the map, going from the Atlantic to the Red Sea and saying, this is the band of jihadists or terrorists. They thought I was crazy. They thought that I was trying to finance my house, ensuring that I have a salary for over the next 20 years. But I think the terrorists had made sure that my theory concretized and was a reality. So it wasn't an issue of early warning. It was an issue of early realization, an issue of political will and acceptance that there is a problem. And second, now is the issue of how to act once you receive the information, what needs to be done. So I think the next challenge that we'll be facing in the region will be the early reaction or I would say the development of response options in that respect. Having talked about and addressed the immediate operational structural challenges, I think, as we are almost, the time is out, to think about the solutions. What possibilities and options are there for us to exploit and to reverse the tide? So Jason, during drawing from your extensive research into the evolution of terrorist groups, I'm not a big fan of jihadist groups because jihad has something, another noble cause, in Islam, but the terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and the so-called Islamic State across Africa, how can Sahelian governments effectively confront transnational extremist networks? While at the same time, trying to address the internal political fragmentation that we spoke about and then the erosion of public trust.
No, it's a great question, and again, I will defer to my more esteemed colleagues, but I mean, I think from an external perspective, the way that we look at it is that there is an inherent tension between Sahelian states and civil societies, where there is a mistrust between them. And I think that part of that mistrust, or a large part of it, comes from the fact that many Sahelian states are incapable of exerting and regulating violence in their territories as states are expected to do. And so as a result, often civil society and populations feel as though they are more subject to violence from national militaries and security forces than they are from the terrorist groups that they are ostensibly there to fight. And indeed, research has shown recently that at least in one study, that Malian populations, for instance, are 3 times more likely to be harmed as a result of violence from security forces and private military contractors as they are from terrorist groups themselves. And so when you're in the situation when you're more afraid of your national security forces than you are from terrorist groups, that inherently creates deep-seated misgivings. I think that the trust is further eroded when these countries have brought in external partners, and there have been a lot over the years, none of whom have really successfully served to combat some of the insecurity. And I think as a result, you are seeing civil societies continuing to push back. And indeed, the changes in government that we've seen in Sahelian countries over the past several years have been caused and have been underwritten, at least ideologically, by this notion that the predecessor governments couldn't effectively combat terrorist groups, which is not necessarily untrue. And so I think this continued failure of national governments and external partners has really led to this breakdown of trust. When your state can't provide the most basic attributes of what a state should do, it's understandable that you would turn and find salience in non-state actors. And I think as a result, VEOs are becoming more attractive as vehicles for people to live ideal lives, as unfortunate as that may be, because they provide security, because they provide a modicum of rule of law, because they can serve as sort of dispute settlers. And I think that our colleague in attendance, I'm not sure if he's here right now, Wasim Nasser, has been really doing some fascinating work looking at how particularly JNIM, the Al-Qaeda branch or offshoot, is working to gain increasing legitimacy as a political actor, and how the leadership there is potentially considering to follow in the footsteps of al-Shara in Syria, and breaking away theoretically or potentially from Al-Qaeda to serve as a legitimate political actor. And I think that the Syria example there is one that we should all look at, to realize that as the states lose credence and as former Al-Qaeda members gain the presidency, that's a path to potential ascendance.
Well, it's a point that we are really monitoring, and we actually prepared a report to the Commission, the African Union Commission, about how the Syrian scenario could be now, I would say, used as example, particularly in the Sahel. And we've seen indications of JNIM positioning itself as a political, I would say, actor, and inviting itself by force to the negotiation table. If they can do it through negotiation, and by looking at the tendency or the threat and how it's progressing, they might use force to gain power and overthrow the juntas in place. So this is a scenario that we are not excluding, and we have to anticipate. Even if it doesn't, concretize, at least, we should give it some thought and see what other scenarios can develop from it. Let me go back to the general. So speaking of, anticipation again, speaking of intelligence, speaking of analysis, what institutional reforms or operational innovations are needed to scale up joint action and intelligence coordination among member states? In particular, when you're operating in a region where you have your own members are part of other, I would say, similar structures. So how do you ensure that is better coordination, but how do you ensure also that the intelligence collected is action-oriented?
My first comment is that I agree with the His Excellency Abubakar, who is an intelligence specialist, that counterterrorism operations are driven by credible and timely intelligence. Credible and timely intelligence. So how do you coordinate that? In Accra Initiative, we have learned that the best way is to have focal points within the member states. You know, focal points within the member states who will exchange the intelligence, pass it on to the secretariat or to operational headquarters for assessment, for analysis, and to derive the right intelligence for operations. So that is one way of coordinating intelligence, having focal points in country. And the second is that you must also have credible, secured communication systems between the headquarters and the various member state intelligence agencies. So if you're asking me about how coordination will be achieved, this is how I see it. In terms of operational reforms, we have also learned that, the traditional way of combating terrorism is not working. Just complete kinetic combat operations will not win the fight. State-centered operations will not win the fight. Bilateralism is good enough, but it is also not adequate. The best strategy, we think, is multilateralism, and that is when 3 or more countries come together and do the fight. So if you are talking about operational reforms, I see it this way. Secondly, we have also found that kinetic operations alone will not win the fight, so you need a measured blend of kinetic operations or active lethal combat operations with non-kinetic activities, to win and pacify the deprived communities that are prone to radicalization and recruitment for criminal activities. You need to pacify them. And that is when you bring social amenities down from the cities to the rural areas, to the deprived areas. And that is one way of also augmenting kinetic operations to win the fight. So if we are talking about reforms, operational reforms, this is how we see it at Accra Initiative.
This is great. From a regional perspective, it's always, I would say from at least strategic point of view, able to share strategic intelligence. But in terms of operational intelligence, and I'm sure my brother Abubakar can confirm that bilaterally it's much easier. Once you have more than 2 parties, seriously difficult to share any operational intelligence in that respect. So we're doing 2 things at the AU level. We're encouraging, fusion centers at regional levels, but also to make sure that the regional fusion centers are connected to national fusion centers, which speaks now to the other idea of the kinetic, non-kinetic, meaning that within the national fusion center, you have other actors, government and non-governmental actors, that can play a role not only in collecting the data, but acting upon the intelligence they receive. So it's still work in progress. I hope, the learning curve is going to be steep and very fast for us to pick up the pace, in particular, as we're seeing the progression of the threat to states such as Benin, Togo. God forbid you're from Ghana, cross our fingers, I hope they will not reach Ghana. But it's there. I mean, the indicators are all there in that respect, and we have to praise ourselves. Let me turn back to Ambassador, or His Excellency Simão. Let's reflect a bit on the future of the strategic future of the UN within the Sahel. With peacekeeping missions drawing down, what do you think are the strategic priorities that the UN should focus on to prevent vacuums and build strong-term resilience across security, governance, and environmental stresses in the Sahel? And we've noticed that the vacuums are quickly filled up by state and non-state actors. And I think they've gained so much experience in filling up that vacuum, is that as you are drawing down, they are stepping in. So how do you see these evolve?
Right. Last year, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the summit for the future. And one of the key components is economic development. If you look at the countries of the Sahel in general, all of them are poor. And therefore, the states are not able to provide basic goods and services to the populations, as the General mentioned here. This lays the ground fertile for recruitment for terrorism, in particular for the youth. If you look at the youth of the region today, they are left with the three options. One, they are vendors in the markets, selling small goods, fake goods in the markets. The second option is to migrate. So migration continues to be a response to this lack of future. And the third is to join criminal gangs, including terrorism. But the economic development can address that. So we have to look at the economic development of the states as a way to create the means to change the future of the region. Otherwise, West Africa in general, but particularly in the Sahel, will continue to be a breeding field for terrorism.
As you mentioned earlier, I think, and I forgot that idea, is that they are a springboard to Europe. But as I was talking to some of our counterparts in Northern America, saying that the drug traffickers that are bringing cocaine to the western coast of Africa could eventually take jihadists or terrorists towards the Americas. So the distances are becoming very closer, and the threat that was back in Southeast Asia or in Syria or Iraq is getting closer to the West in that respect. So Abu Bakr, my dear brother, one question. We've heard from our colleague and general in the Accra initiative about the importance of intelligence. I think we discussed the issue of sovereignty when we met in the lobby 2 days ago, and the political will. So what gaps persist, and how can intelligence sharing be strengthened without really undermining state, and I would say, or national sovereignty?
Now, quickly, this can be done. It's a problem, actually, really, trying to defend sovereignty and then yet open up to intelligence sharing, which is essential to actually strengthen sovereignty in the other way. What needs to be done, actually, to be able to do the intelligence sharing and at the same time protect sovereignty is to expand bilateral relationship that we have, and also expand the regional organization, probably try to bring them under some kind of superstructure of sharing of intelligence and so on. But that should be based, again, on what I will call tailored parameters. Clearly, what needs to be shared on what kind of things. And this brings me to the next point, which is to have focus on mutual and common threats, like, for instance, terrorism that we are facing now, regional crime that are over there, and even issues that have to do with disasters, with health issues, for instance, information regarding outbreak of disasters relating to not just human, but also animals and crops and so on and so forth. So this really ensures the security of nations and also the welfare of the people of the countries, and when you focus on that. But also countries can leverage on defense pact, collective defense pact. For instance, the ECOWAS or AU standby force, but leveraging on the kind of Article 5 of NATO, for instance, that ensures that one country, if is violated or aggressed upon, the other countries will, that will build trust and confidence and so on. And then, of course, also you need to be sharing intelligence, exchanging training, for instance, so that officers and operatives will be training together. And that also build confidence and so on and so forth. But above all, like I said earlier, the goodwill, the political will of leaders is very important here. We've had cases where joint operations, and of course also we need to be doing more joint operations. And joint operations are only successful when the political leadership have very strong support to those kind of operations. Otherwise, if there is suspicion, mutual suspicion between leaders, that will not work. So, and to reduce suspicion is to minimize kind of access, have secure communication system, for instance, technology, we're talking about it and so on. So I see the time is up. So I can stop here if this is what is needed.
Thank you
very much.
Well, you know, political will is the condition or the hurdle in that respect. But there is also the threat that is urgent. And sometimes the political will is imposed by the bad guys, unfortunately. But when it is imposed by the bad guys, we start running around like headless chickens, with all due respect, and try to find solutions and patch here and there without really, you know, addressing the root causes that have led many of our nationals to join these VE or terrorist groups. You know, even if the time is up, I think I'm allocated, or I'm giving myself, you know, 4 minutes, additional 4 minutes, to give each one of the speakers 1 minute in order for you to maybe present to us or propose to us political, institutional, or operational, I would say, recommendations that should be taken within the next 24 hours to reverse the tide in the Sahel. So let me start with Jason.
In the next 24 hours,
I'm obsessed by 24 hours.
Okay.
It's 24 months.
24, okay. 24 hours, I don't know. I mean, I think, no concrete suggestion, but I think it's important, as we all have in this room recognized, we're entering into the emergence of a new, much more multipolar world order. And I think recognizing, at least from my perspective, the perhaps waning interest from some of the more traditional players in this arena, I think is likely to mark the future from some of the things I see.
Thank you. I think 24 hours Jack Bauer would need to be brought up in to the podium. Your Excellency, Mr. Simão.
For me, it's just two aspects. First, support, real support to regional mechanism. And secondly, start medium to long-term development programs to the continent. Thank you.
I will use my 1 minute to make a passionate appeal to everybody in the fight against cross-border terrorism in the Sahel and West Africa today. I think that Accra initiative is the most plausible mechanism, and it needs the support of everybody. Terrorism is not a one-man's business. Terrorism is everybody's business. Thank you.
Thank you. Abubakar.
The dialogue that is now going on between ECOWAS as a group and the AES country, I think, should continue, should reach a point. Bilaterally, we need to be engaging each other. Nigeria, for instance, last week's the Minister of Foreign Affairs was in Niger, for instance, and there was a communique was issued, and which is very, very reassuring. And this needs to be strengthened. There has to be dialogue, and diplomacy has to prevail, so that, because it's the same people, it's the same. We are dealing with a territory as vast and large as the Sahel, with non-state actors operating and taking advantage of the contradictions, including political contradictions and social and economic contradictions and situations on the ground. So political leaders need to accelerate and strengthen diplomacy engagements and to be ready and willing to make compromises in order to deal with a situation that is actually constituting an existential threat to all the region, to the countries.
Well, thank you. I'll just make a few comments in saying it's been really fascinating, and I thank you very much for your all valuable insight that you brought to the discussion today, which highlighted not only the complexity of the challenges that the Sahel is facing, but also paved the way and indicated some solutions, or at least some ideas on how one can progress. I'd like to also thank the Sufan Center. I didn't do that. I thought I'll do it at the end, and the State of Qatar for inviting us all, but also for this valuable, I would say, event, which is a concentration of gray matters, that is grouped within 3 days in order to discuss, very important issues of peace and security globally, and for always, putting in the program some sessions on African security issues. Thank you very much.